Good evening, everyone. Today it's super scientist, Mr. Christiaan Huygens. Huygens. Kind of a cool name, if I say so myself. Christiaan Huygens, as we can see, he was the uncle of modern science. We have Galileo, who was the father of modern science with all the amazing work that he did. But our boy Huygens here was the uncle of modern science because he was also a polymath. He did tons of experiments, tons of observations, tons of discoveries in mechanics, in astronomy, in a variety of fields. He deserves this title, the uncle of modern science. I also like to call him not Cristiano Ronaldo, but it might help you remember him. Christiaan Huygens, pretty cool name. Okay, so our boy Huygens here was born in The Hague, or Hague, Netherlands. I don't know, apparently it's real. In 1629. That was a long time ago. In fact, it was 366 years before, you may guess this one, maybe you know her, maybe you don't, before Dua Lipa. And if you don't know who she is, go on the internet and listen to her music. There you go, Dua Lipa. Like I said, he was a polymath. He made tons of amazing discoveries. He was brilliant, mega genius, was Christiaan, not Ronaldo. Mr. Huygens here. A couple of his ideas are some of his major big boy discoveries. One of them was he invented the pendulum clock in 1656. And he also developed the wave theory of light. This was revolutionary. Even though it really he wasn't heralded as this kind of paragon of the wave theory. He wasn't like the biggest proponent of it. This was pretty big to the idea that light traveled in waves. This is back in the 1600s he develops this theory. And among his other discoveries, this one's kind of like forgotten, but this is actually a huge discovery. Like 150 years later, in the 1820s or something, other scientists caught on to Huygens' initial concepts, his math, and his observations of how light and optics work. And it turns out that light does travel in waves. How about that? So, a very revolutionary discovery by Mr. Huygens here, way ahead of its time, by hundreds of years. And he formulated this idea. This is at the time of Newton as well, so another thing to consider is Huygens is contemporaries of our boys Galileo and Isaac Fig Newton. And he was a little bit older than Newton, but Newton was alive at this time, and Newton, many years after, develops his theory of light. They're both working with light and optics and glass and all this other stuff. But Huygens here saw it as a wave, whereas Newton saw it as a particle, or what they called back in the day corpuscle, or corpuscular. Fun, fancy science term there. So back in the day, scientists, because they didn't know what they were doing, corpuscle. It was called a corpuscle, was a particle. So, how about that? But anyway, a lot of people had subscribed to Newton's idea because he was so brilliant. So they're like, oh, it's like a particle or something, or a corpuscle. And in fact, it's actually both, we now know. But anyway, but Huygens here is the first one to propose a wave theory of light, which is also partially true. So that's pretty legendary, pretty epic for our boy Huygens. Now, what were some of his other legendary discoveries? Let's dig in. Okay, so moving on to Mr. Huygens' major big boy discoveries. So he wrote this epic book called Horologium Oscillatorium. Sounds weird. It is not a Harry Potter spell, but it is in fact a book on mechanics and motion. Some of Huygens' brilliant ideas on the mechanics of motion, especially like moving bodies in circles and like almost like orbits, rotation, revolution, that kind of thing. He really outlines the idea of centrifugal force in Horologium Oscillatorium. So he outlines centrifugal force, which I like to highlight the F here. I like to distinguish the two, centrifugal force versus centripetal force. What are the two differences here? He highlights mostly centrifugal in this published scientific work. Centrifugal force, you can think of it as like fleeing away. I like to think of the F as flying away or flinging away. Also, a crazy thing about centrifugal force is it's actually a fictitious force. So I like to think of that F. It's actually not real, technically. Kind of weird. We can talk about it later. Don't worry about it. But it's not actually a force that is exerted by itself, but it's a consequence of rotation. So a quick example, when something's spinning and spinning and spinning, the force that an object feels going in is centripetal. So that's the centripetal force. So when an object is flying in, it's the centripetal force. When it's flying out, that would be the centrifugal force. So those two forces acting on, Huygens is mostly discussing centrifugal force and outlines some of the mathematics behind that idea. Pretty cool. Okay, now moving on to his kind of astronomical discoveries. Pretty epic here for Huygens. Now remember I talked about the wave theory of light. Well, Huygens was really epic with optics and glasses. He actually was very good. He worked with another scientist on glass making, and he was very good at designing lenses. And turns out, remember at this time in the 1600s, we got telescopes cranking it up out here. They're checking out all the stars and planets. They're making all these crazy observations like, what's out there? I can actually see it now. So pretty crazy stuff going on with astronomy here. Turns out Huygens actually was able to create a telescope with a lens that could magnify objects about 43 times. The lens magnification 43 times allows him to discover in 1655, he discovers Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn. As you probably have heard of Titan, it's featured in many pieces of fiction. I think it's like in Dead Space, and it's all out there all the time. You heard about Titan at this point. Titan is very promising as a world, has a ton of methane, who knows if it harbors life, we'll find out. But Titan is definitely a big study for many astronomers in modern times. Huygens is the one who discovers it for the first time. And pretty epic discovery there, pretty awesome. He also discovered the rings of Saturn, and he wrote about it in his epic book called Systema Saturnium in 1659. Pretty cool title here, Systema Saturnium. Published this work in 1659. He actually made the observation in 1655, a few years prior, but he finally finished his work talking about his discovery. And he actually correctly claims, because of his big boy telescopes, unlike Galileo, poor Galileo over there has got this kind of weak telescope, can't really see what Huygens sees. Mr. Christiaan. So he observes that they're actually rings, because remember Galileo thought they were ears? It's like, nah dude, they're not ears. What are you talking about? They're rings. And he outlines the idea of there's something that is not touching Saturn. There's a disk around Saturn that is not touching. For the first time, observational evidence that there are rings, that they float around the orb of Saturn. Pretty epic. So this is our boy Huygens, a major discovery. First time that a ring system was actually discovered. Scientists didn't know what to make of it. Like, what's going on? There's rings around a planet? I don't know what's going on. It's pretty weird. Pretty fascinating. Who knew that such a thing could exist? And there it is. Bright and beautiful on Saturn. So, how about that? Some other fun stuff. This one is more just a fun idea that Huygens actually published. I don't know if it was the year of his death. I know it was published posthumously, but it was in 1698 that this was finished. This has an epic title called Cosmotherios. Who knows what that means, but it's something with cosmos, some universe thing, I don't know. Anyway, it's a speculative piece of, it's kind of science fiction-y, but of course he was a scientist, so it combines his ideas of science with some of his big brain imaginative speculative ideas. He's just guessing here. And he outlines his ideas on aliens, extraterrestrials. He also outlines the concept that H2O is essential for life. So he's like, oh yeah, water is super essential for life and stuff. And there's probably a bunch of aliens out there. And he combined ideas of God. He's a very religious man. So he's like, oh yeah, God put all these planets out there for us to find other aliens. And we got to find them now. And now we got Titan up here. And maybe there's aliens on Titan. More on that later. There's also other crazy stuff. And who knows what's going on with, who knows what's going on out there? We're aliens. We're looking for aliens. What's going on? So anyway, pretty cool idea from Huygens. He was a scientist, but I like to think it's kind of like even our boy Carl Sagan as well, how he was always thinking way ahead. And there were some other people who had speculated at this time, other astronomers, who thought, there might be aliens out there. Kepler was another one that kind of envisioned humanity traveling the stars. And so I think Huygens here is way ahead of his time, thinking about the potential to find other beings, other life forms beyond the Earth. Pretty epic. So that about wraps it up for our boy Huygens. One quick note here. His daddy was not like your daddy or my daddy. He was an intellectual. He was a diplomat. And he was actually friends with René Descartes, another philosopher guy. He was famous for saying things like, I think, therefore I am. If it were only that easy to become famous. But René Descartes here also claimed Huygens was very astute mathematically, as you can guess, with all his amazing work. Descartes here, an amazing mind of his own, claimed he was friends of Huygens here, and he said that Huygens is the next Archimedes, which would mean a lot if you know who Archimedes is. But I talked about him on the channel. Archimedes was a great ancient mathematician, ancient Greek mathematician, legendary mind in his own right, had theories of displacement, mathematics. Huygens here rivals him, certainly, with all his works on mechanics, motion, astronomy, optics, his wave theory of light. Amazing work. Christiaan, not Ronaldo. Christiaan Huygens, super scientist, number whatever. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out.